In this session, we'll explore the possible point where specialist input may become appropriate in planning a new forest or woodland, and how to ensure any commissioned services remain fit for purpose. Within this process, it's important to realise the benefit you gain from understanding the heritage value of your land. To undertake competent forest design, it's essential that you understand the nature of the historic environment as it exists within and around the land you're managing. Within the last session, we looked at how material can be gathered on the historic environment within a chosen locale. The material presented in that session was genuine. Dealing with the land you manage will necessitate you to gather this information yourself and to recognise, in conjunction with advisory services, when you need to source professional surveys and assessments. Within this session, we are going to follow a straightforward path. Know your land. Without your own baseline knowledge, you will limit your ability to judge the scale of any problem. Survey and assessment. When you should commission professional service and which techniques are most appropriate to your needs. Constraint mapping. The importance of understanding and insisting upon competent constraint information from your chosen contractor. It may seem obvious, but it's easy to forget. The reason that heritage sites survive in the landscape is because of the choices made by generations of farmers, foresters and estate managers. While some of these may have been fortuitously protected sites and landscapes, in other cases it's clear that deliberate choices were made to retain these monuments with no direction from government or other external agency. Within the same communities, there's often a depth of knowledge about past land use and important monuments. This should be the starting point for any land manager to improve their understanding of their land. The next resource to use is the Forestry Commission Scotland's Guide on the available sources of historic environment information and advice. This is a route map through the readily available resources. Using the historic environment information and advice, you can build your own baseline of information. This guide is web mounted within the heritage pages of the Forestry Commission Scotland's website. As we looked at in session 3, PastMap gives you access to all online historic environment records, national and local authority, as well as many of the designations we covered in session 2. In essence, this is the sum of our known historic environment. Look carefully at individual records to see how they were entered into the database. Are they the product of modern survey or antiquarian discovery? The latter suggests that a site may have changed considerably since it was recorded, while the former may show a good modern level of understanding of this landscape already exists. The first place to check this would be to see if there are associated reports that could make your life easier. Historic mapping is also readily available through the National Library of Scotland online services. As you've seen, these can be reviewed over modern mapping or aerial imagery. It's a great resource that is being improved every year and has applications far broader than just the identification of heritage sites, as it shows you past landscape and land uses. The next critical online resource is the Historic Land Use Assessment, or HLA map. A partnership initiative that gives a valuable insight into both the character of the modern landscape and, through the relic layers, traces of past land use across Scotland. This is presented through an interactive web-based map. The combination of local knowledge with these online resources will provide you with a good initial base of what the heritage resource is on your land. To date, you will have built an understanding, drawing in resources maintained by the heritage professionals you will be discussing your planting proposals with. You have an advantage. You can look in the course of your work at the location of these sites. Test your ability to identify them on the ground. Consider whether the information you hold is sound. Also, you can consider the extent of each monument. This will allow you to bring to any discussion a subtler understanding of the needs of your sites. Also, through familiarising yourself with known or previously mapped sites in the flesh, you will also expand your ability to identify new sites. Remember the Forestry Commission Scotland's guide on identifying the historic environment in Scotland's forests and woodlands. We followed in session 1 that will help you. The more you think about any gaps which need to be completed, the more likely it is you will recognise when you need to commission professional surveys and what you need them to deliver. Professional survey should only be commissioned where either there is credible concern based on the character of your land that there are currently unidentified sites of value, or that information is lacking on known sites, such as reliable extents or character description. The more you understand, the more you can recognise whether either these conditions are met. For instance, ask yourself, if I was to retain this site, could I identify where the protected area would be on a map?
My name is Matt Ritchie. I'm the Forestry Commission Scotland archaeologist. My role is to provide advice and guidance to the Forest District in regard to the best practice management of archaeology and the historic environment on Scotland's National Forest Estate. My role can be broken down into 3 main parts. That's the protection of the archaeological resource, conservation management of significant sites, and promotional work, whether that be promoting best practice archaeological work or indeed providing interpretation of significant archaeological sites on woodland walks, for example. And I'm going to briefly take you through those 3 key areas. In terms of protection, it's largely organising archaeological walkover surveys in advance of forest establishment, advising our rangers in terms of coop checks when you're looking to fell or restock. It's basically about knowing, getting the knowledge of the historic environment to the right people in the right format. So I try and advise our archaeological contractors to categorise the archaeological walkover surveys that they would do, so we know where the most important sites are, for example, and the less important sites. In terms of conservation management, it's largely scrub control, control of regenerating trees, perhaps even masonry consolidation at significant sites. It's all about identifying the significant sites and those where conservation management is appropriate. This can be done at a small scale, in community woodlands, for example, or at a large scale within commercial conifer plantations. The key thing is to identify the right sites for conservation management and discuss the right approaches with the relevant people. As Forestry Commission Scotland archaeologist, the aspect of my work I really enjoy is presentation of our most significant sites. And this can take the form of an interpretive panel, perhaps at a site like a hill fort or a dune, a significant archaeological site, usually at the end of a woodland path. And this is something that community woodlands or indeed large commercial conifer plantations can incorporate into their forest plan. It's very much about being a custodian of our historic landscape, and some of the most significant elements of that, be they a township or a hill fort, they can be a really important part of pride of place for a local community and visitors from further afield. So looking back on my role, it's very much about protection of the historic environment using GIS and archaeological walkover surveys and best practice knowledge and guidance to the people who really matter, and that's the people on the ground. It's about conservation in terms of conservation management, scrub control of significant sites, for example, and it's about presentation and being best practice custodians of our most significant cultural heritage.
You should by this point have compiled your own constraints map for the historic environment. If you have done this carefully, keeping notes, you should be able to ask a series of questions about your sites. This is a good point to contact your curator to discuss your proposal. Being informed on the sites on your ground allows you to question whether they have any additional information beyond that which is web mounted, and discuss what the benefit, if any, in a professional survey. But who are these curators? Well, firstly, there are the local authority archaeology services. Each authority, including the national parks, maintains such a service, and it typically has two core aspects: maintenance of the local historic environment record and provision of guidance and advice. The scale of the guidance and advice provided and any associated fees depend on locally set priorities, which will change with time. A number of the local authority archaeology services also cover more than one authority. The other big player is Historic Scotland, the government agency that provides advice on the historic character and resources across Scotland. Their offices are responsible for many of the protective designations covered in Session 2, and they administer the scheduled monument consent process that constrains any works that could impact on a scheduled monument. While their website is a good for resources, you would only approach Historic Scotland where you have a specific designation that they have responsibility for. Once you have, potentially with the assistance of the relevant curator, recognised the need for a survey, there are three techniques that should be considered: desktop study, prospective survey, and detailed survey. The appropriateness of which are needed and over what area will depend on your knowledge of the ground. The more you know and can pass on, the less additional work is necessary. You should always ask, does all your land need these additional surveys? Desktop study takes a form similar to that discussed in Session 3, the use of HERs. Drawing on available web resources, but also sourcing documents within archives, examining aerial photographs, undertaking a literature search for more detailed information. This is a rapid process and should collate the known heritage sites and landscapes, identifying those with protection through designations. However, any report should not solely be the regurgitation of the available sources. There must be analysis of the information with the aim of clarifying patterns of activity, loss, and survival. This can be used by you to test the assumptions as to what portion of your ground would benefit from further works, looking at focusing on the areas of highest potential. The second stage is prospective survey, seeking to identify new sites and define a common set of characteristics, nature, form, and extent to all sites and landscapes present. This involves deploying teams to visit known sites and seek to identify new ones. The defining of a site's extent, the last characteristic, is essential to any effective use of this data in forest design. If you can't draw a boundary to the site on a forest design plan, how can you manage it? By being on the ground, the survey team should also be examining the site's location within the landscape to see whether groups of monuments share associations. Your survey team should produce dimension sketches, written descriptions, and photographs to describe each site. This information should include its modern environment, such as bracken, erosion, or modern tracks. The importance of views or vistas in the setting of the site should also be considered and recorded at this point. To generate this record is difficult for complex sites, and like all survey work, small teams that challenge and question one another frequently produce better records than solitary workers. Once the site is understood, the boundary that defines the extent should be mapped, typically using sub-meter accuracy GPS equipment. Systematic survey can cover a whole land holding, a comprehensive approach, but no survey can guarantee to identify every possible site. Alternatively, information gathered or afforestation plans can be used to target survey. For instance, locations known to be favoured for site establishment, areas adjacent to watercourses, summit areas. These could be the subject of targeted work, or areas of survival, areas that have not been enclosed or ploughed. By undertaking targeted prospective survey, the cost of this exercise can be reduced while maintaining the quantity and quality of the information recovered. This is a topic for discussion with the Local Authority Archaeology Service and your potential contractor. There is no reason why prospective survey cannot be undertaken on existing woodland to inform remodelling or pre-felling for forest blocks. However, within dense commercial plantations, pre-felling survey should be targeted at known sites to inform on the risks associated with harvesting. Broader prospective survey to identify new sites or to consider the different protection measures within the design of a restocking scheme may be better placed post-felling. The final stage, detailed survey, looks at recovering complex information about individual sites. Detailed survey usually involves the recovery of very detailed and accurate plans or elevations about individual sites, often a base for analysis of the development and evolution of that site. As such, this level of work is only usually initiated where that information has a purpose in either the management of the site or as a record where the site is expected to be lost, and such detailed record is appropriate. Conservation management is one of the main reasons such a record may be compiled, with the product commonly being accurate scale plans and elevations of monuments that can be used as a baseline record of its condition and character. It's not advisable to commission such detailed survey, usually instrument-based work, when there is not a clear purpose that necessitates the gathering of this information. Whatever the process you use to gather information about your ground, be that new desktop studies, prospective survey of whatever intensity, or detailed survey, the end result must be a series of deliverables from your contractor that informs constraint mapping. So the location of the sites identified must be supplied to you in a manner that you can integrate into your systems, that you can use for developing forest plans. Further, your contractor must go beyond just identifying the sites and relic landscapes that are present. Again, like the desktop study, there must be interpretation and analysis. Value should be attributed to these assets, areas defined and recommendations made, which tie directly into the UKFS Historic Environment Guidelines and other policies we are exploring in these sessions. Without this analysis and recommendations, you'll find it harder to prioritise your response and understand how the forestry proposal can be flexed and shaped to be compatible with the historic environment. Quite simply, the survey report should enable you to integrate the forest design with the historic environment. One very important aspect to remember is that you have benefited from the historic environment records, our shared accumulated knowledge about the historic environment. If you have commissioned new assessment or survey work, if you have identified new sites, these need to be reported back to the same records so that this knowledge can be maintained and improved. Likewise, if someone offers to survey or study your ground as part of a larger study, this is to your benefit. Survey does not create these sites and landscape. It identifies and analyses them. So if you can get some of this information for free, welcome it. If you have discovered information, share it. Well, we've come a long way in our sessions. We've considered what historic landscapes are, explored legislation and guidelines, looked at how to gather information from historic environment records, and now looked at commissioning new surveys. We have now covered all the ground that will enable us in the next session to look at the UKFS Historic Environment Guidelines and get to grip with the requirements that will deliver sustainable forestry.